Welcome to Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming, your weekly podcast dedicated to what your business can achieve when it's powered by Podio. Join us each week as we learn from the top Podio partners in the world, as we investigate system integrations and add-ons, and hear from real business owners who have implemented Podio into their business. Now, join Jordan Samuel Fleming, CEO of Smartphone, for this week's episode.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Supercharged. I'm your host, Jordan Samuel Fleming, here to talk all about the power of workflow and automation when your business is powered by Podio. Well, this week's episode brings back another returning champion for a very specific reason. I brought back Pete Cuff from Future Solutions, a Podio partner just like I used to be, does a lot of building inside of Podio, and we're here to talk about a very specific thing that we get asked about all the time, which is how do I share Podio data with people outside of Podio? What are the best practices? And Pete and I dive into this a little. It kind of goes along with a masterclass that I'm putting up right now, showing you this in a more direct way. But what are the ways you can share data? What are the pros of each way of doing so? What are the cons? What are the best practices? What are the options you have available to you? You know, we all know, and certainly if you listen to this podcast, hopefully you'll hear my passion about how amazing Podio is to manage the business, do the workflow, share information across your team. But what about those times when I need to show a customer something? I need to bring a contractor in and show them something. Podio is built for that in many ways, and we go through in this podcast the kind of different opportunities you have and the pros and cons around them. As always, please do make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, give a subscribe, make sure you're up to date on the masterclasses, go to your podcast platform, give it a like, give it a share, give it a rating. It really does help to spread the gospel of Podio. And of course, as always, enjoy this episode. Very special episode talking about how to share Podio data outside of Podio with Pete Cuff. Let's have a listen. We decided that for this episode, we would focus on kind of deep diving into sharing Podio data, right? Like, you know, for those who, I should probably start out with today's guest, as you have heard from the introduction, is Pete Cuff from Future Solutions. Pete's a very old partner. Podio partner. His company Future Solutions builds systems, supports systems, and when we were chatting about things that we thought would be useful for the podcast, we always try and make sure we come up with ideas about what would be useful. We talked about this notion of sharing Podio data with other people, and that's really where we want to kind of focus on today, and discuss the different ways you can achievement, and also kind of pros and cons about it, right, Pete?
Yeah. So one of the kind of great things about Podio is when you're in it, it all makes sense. But when you're out of it, or you're just starting to get in for the first time, it can be very confusing, very overwhelming. First and foremost, Podio is a collaboration platform. It's meant to bring people together into one place, but sometimes that place can be a bit too big, or you don't want to share 100% of everything. You just want to share 1% of what you want that one person to see. So that's when these different kind of methods can come in handy.
That, and I think, because so many of us build, Podio becomes usually a real powerhouse of your business, right? Like it ends up kind of touching and bringing in so much of your day-to-day kind of business that you end up having a lot of data in there that you may want to share with someone outside of your organization, an accountant or a consultant or contractors or whatever that is, customers. And because Podio is so powerful at that part, the next logical step is, how do I externalize some of the amazing things I've done in my Podio? How do I get the results or the information into someone else's hands? So it's not even just about, about the somewhat kind of convoluted onboarding. It's also about, you may never want people to know Podio exists sometimes. And sometimes you do want them to know Podio exists, or sometimes you don't care that Podio exists. And each use case has its value. So if it's okay with you, Pete, I'm going to drive the first part of this to say, I want to focus on this in two parts. That's using the word part way too many times, I understand. So part one will be, and I want to focus on sharing Podio with other people. And part two will be sharing Podio data using an external vehicle of some sort, because there are multiple different ways of using Podio and sharing things with the native Podio kind of structure. And there are pluses and minuses of all of them. So if I think about it, Pete, I'm thinking of, you can share an item, you can bring people into Podio into a workspace, and you can use a native web form. Those would be the three that I would class as part one, right? That is, you are using Podio and you are exposing people to Podio in a certain way. So let's talk about those first. Why do you think, if we go through those three, when are they good? When are they bad? When are they in between? What do you think?
Okay, well, let's start, I suppose, with probably the easiest one, which is to share an individual item in an app with somebody else. So firstly, the logistics of how you actually do that is typically on, say, the comments field on the right hand side. You can just do an @ symbol and then start typing in somebody's email address, and that will start sharing. When you then send that message, you write a comment to them, send them that message, they will then receive an email from Podio with Podio's branding, Podio's name, etc. on it, saying, Jordan shared this with you, or Jordan said this to you. And then it'll have a snippet of what's going on, and it'll have a button saying click here to reply, or click here to go and have a look. And that in itself is brilliant, because it puts everything that you need just onto one email. Everybody knows and trusts email. It's very familiar. And of course it's read only as well at that point. They can't change anything, they can't do anything with it. Now I'll kind of spare the details of, once they're in, you can change those permissions and so forth. But what it will then do and drive is that person then, in order to see that item, needs to come and open a Podio account. And
that's where it all falls down.
Yeah, that's Citrix's model.
Yeah,
that is
that
the
makes
model
sense.
for Podio, right?
I mean, it makes sense, but it is a massive weakness of this type of sharing, because it drives the necessity of, I got to create an account for this shit. So there's that problem. And the second problem, I think, because, we could spend 40 minutes just on this bit and nobody will learn anything. The second problem is, it's really a clunky way of sharing information, because there's no filtering or sorting or organizing that which you have shared with you. So when that person, even if I'm a Podio user already, but I'm in a different company, if you share me something, an item, it goes into my shared with you section, and there's no filtering, no sorting, no searching. And so beyond a handful of things, it becomes a fucking pain in the ass.
I knew it wouldn't be long before various expletives left your mouth when it came on about that process. Yeah, but you're right. It's really annoying. It's fantastic if you've only got one or two things that you want to share with a person. That's where it comes into its own. That's great. And also it works well if you're able, say, to talk to that person first and say, by the way, you're going to receive an email. It's from our system, Podio. You'll need to open an account. Don't worry, it's all free. Follow the stuff on screen and you'll be fine. And as long as you can kind of give them that warning that this stuff is about to happen, then it can probably start to make sense. I accidentally shared an item with a friend recently, way back in the day. And he replied back saying, so go on then, what's this Podio thing? And I had to kind of explain, it's this big old system. Sorry, I didn't mean to do it. I couldn't pull it back. And it was just like, well, it would have been a lot easier if he was on the phone at the time that I did it. And said, there, check your inbox. Now you've got a link. So that's that's the first one. But yeah, the downside is most definitely that you go on to the Citrix's onboarding journey, which is clunky as hell and doesn't make sense. And they try and explain what everything is, when really it's just pointless.
Well, there's that. And then that leads us into what I would class as the next step up, which is bringing someone into a workspace.
Right.
Now, that is a big step up in that it can become a truly collaborative tool with an external group of people. You can very successfully, and I have myself and seen many of our customers very successfully bring in external teams into workspaces and have them start to love Podio, and have them really get going. So this is a definite step up in that what you're doing at this stage is you're actually bringing them into a workspace or multiple workspaces, but usually just one. And you're essentially, when you do that, you're giving them the opportunity to use the workspace, the apps and everything, see everything as though they normally would. And that means that they can collaborate with you like any Podio user can. But of course, as Pete, I'm sure will about to point out, the downside of that is if you're bringing people in who don't need to be in Podio very often, you're essentially going to be a Podio helpline for them, because they're going to come in every month to see the one thing you need them to see. And they're going to be like, what the hell, where do I go? How do I, that whole onboarding process when you get a new staff into Podio and the time it takes for them to learn it, you have to do with everybody over and over again.
Absolutely. And it's complicated because it's unusual. People don't know how to use Podio out of the box.
You don't know where to find workspaces.
Yeah. The first time I logged into Podio and took out an account, I didn't get it. And I nearly closed my account and walked the other way. I'm very glad I came back a few years later and gave it another try. And it finally started to make sense to me. But there's a huge learning curve. And you either get it or you don't. And most people don't, in my experience. And the thing that when you add someone into a workspace, if you are getting them in, my advice would be whatever that workspace is in the first instance, make it as simple as possible. So, for example, one of our clients used it as a way to have a forum for their customers, and they had several thousand external users in that workspace. And yes, most of them didn't engage with it, but some really got it. And you know what it's like when you go onto a forum and you see, the same old names over and over and over again. It's like there were people who got it, and they just need to get to a certain point to make it work. But it's a real challenge, I think, to get people to understand it. And one of the ways that you could seek to improve that, as I've said before, firstly, ideally have someone on the phone or in person and show them through it. But for purposes of scale, why not record your own onboarding journey? Why not record your own video showing them this is the workspace that you're going to be a member of or a sample of it. This is what you click on. This is an app. This is the activity stream, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can really target your message and get those users to only see the stuff that you really want them to focus on.
I agree with that. And the second thing I would say about that is that this is really, in my opinion, this is really only applicable for the people you want to be working in Podio with on a very regular basis. It doesn't really matter how simple you make the workspace. If they're only going to see it once a month, use one of our other methods we'll talk about, because it's not worth the hassle. But like if I've seen people bring customers in very successfully to Podio, and contractors, subcontractors, etc. And as long as you have a clear and an obvious workspace with a very few set of apps that make complete sense, and people are working in there all the time, it can be incredibly powerful, because you suddenly have all the collaboration that you're used to, but you've got it with people who are outside of your organizations. You got subcontractors who are managing a project with you, and they can see everything and comment and assign tasks and do tasks. And so there's huge value to that. And I can't stress enough the fact that Podio's business model is, to its credit in this way, you can bring an unlimited amount of external users into your organization. And for free. And that is not something that most of these systems have. And that means that if you can get this model working, you can actually bring a lot of people into your system, have them fully working inside it, and you are not paying a monthly fee for those people. So that's a huge benefit to that model.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd liken it also a bit to, say, Google's model, which is, you can attach a Google Doc to a email, but what you really want to do is open a Google account so you can now collaborate on that item live. It's kind of that similar model of, if you can get them in and explain to them what this is, then you really start to reap the benefits on the other side.
100% agree with that. And yeah, and just to round out the internal kind of Podio bits, because I want to get through all of these today if we can. There's one final one, which is a kind of using the internal bits of Podio, which are pre-populated web forms. So if we think about it, the first one is the one I never recommend, which is simply to share an item. It is the worst case in my opinion. Bringing people into the workspace is the second one, which can be hugely powerful and has huge benefits, but has to be done in a specific and controlled way. And then the third one is the individual pre-filled web form. So Pete, why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, so the pre-filled web form, that's the one where you're going to need the most level of, I'd say, coding / planning to make this work for you. But the flip side of that is that it's very, very powerful if used correctly. So every single app in Podio can be turned into a web form in just a couple of clicks. That means that external users can populate whichever fields you set to be shown with the data. So it's like they're in Podio and putting in the data themselves, but it's all done at arm's length outside of Podio looking in. Now, how you pre-populate fields on a web form, because when it first loads, it will be blank. How you pre-populate it is you append a query string. So that's a set of parameters and values to the end of the URL, the website address for that web form. And it means you can do things like, let's say you've given each customer or client of yours an ID that you want them to cite, or a code to put in to get a discount or something like that. It means that you can pre-populate that field so that when they arrive, it's already there. Now, the details of how to do that are documented more in the Podio help documentation. I think I'd recommend working through that in person rather than trying to explain it over a podcast. Yeah. But the basic premise is you have the URL of the web form, a question mark, and then you set like field X equals ABC, field Y equals 1, 2, 3, and it will populate.
It can be hugely powerful,
hugely powerful, because you can make it do really clever stuff, especially when you then combine it with a little bit of styling. So a little bit of HTML and or CSS styling. And that's basically what makes the form look the way that it does. So web forms out the box come with lots of different styling options that you can choose from a drop down, but then there is an option also on that styling bit to add custom styling, so custom CSS. And that's where you can do things like hide a field. So you could use your query string up in your address bar to say that you want to set the ID field to 1, 2, 3, and then you can set your CSS, your styling, to say and hide field ID, so that it's being populated, but the person looking at the web form when they're filling in can't see that the ID is already populated, and most importantly, they can't remove the ID, they can't hide, so they can't change it accidentally. So it's really powerful. Say you could populate it with somebody's first name and last name, so that they know that you've got their data, or that their name or their email or whatever, but you might want to hide how you got to that point, say, or that ID.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example, a real life example, which shows just how this little thing can make your system so easy. And that is, we built a system years ago for a training company that did outdoor training and adventure stuff. And so they would have a customer, they would have people who register for their stuff, for their events. And then they will want to maybe get dietary information and sizing and whatever. And so we simply used Globiflow, Citrix PWA, to create the URL by dropping in tokens, right? By dropping in, so I could get the name from one app and the event ID from another app. And I could do all that because, again, you've got the power of Citrix PWA to grab information from all over the place, create this URL, which meant that when they clicked, they got the automated email that said, "Hey, Jordan, it's time for you your event is 2 weeks away. It's time for you to give us your fucking dietary information." They clicked on the link and it populated, and it's like, the name's Jordan Fleming. The event is, camping in Ediv. The dietary requests are beer, and meat, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was all pre-filled with the information about the event and me. And then I could simply do the bits that I needed and update bits like my contact information and choose bits. And then it went into Podio and we knew exactly who it was, what event it was for. We got everything. And for there, they didn't have to type in a bunch of fields they didn't have to do their name again. And more importantly, they didn't have to do things where they could fuck up the results I needed. So like an event ID or a person ID, when I needed to make sure that this was going to register as Jordan Fleming, I don't want to put that in their hands. And that's one of the powerful things about the web forming elements, the way Pete's talking of, is if you really take it to the way it can be done, you can take information from all over your Podio system, pre-fill the bits in the form, and give someone a really guided experience where all you need to do is gather a bit of data. That's all you need.
Right.
Okay, hands up, who's using Podio for real estate and they don't want more leads? Nobody. You want more leads closed? Well, check out Smartphone for Podio, the only phone system fully built for Citrix Podio, with an fully integrated power dialer and our amazing mobile apps. It means wherever you are, you can make more calls, log to Podio, send more texts, log to Podio, and close more deals, all logged to your Podio CRM. Click the link. Check it out.
But that leads us nicely onto the kind of con of this approach, which is that web forms are just catch tools. They only receive information. So whilst you might be able to pre-fill them for them, you are still then receiving information. You're not updating anything. It's
creating a new item.
Yeah, it creates a brand new item in the app, populated with whatever they have submitted on that form, whether that's pre-filled or not. And therefore, that a important consideration and one to think about when using pre-filled or blank web forms is, generally speaking, it's best to just remember everything is a catch, and therefore there could be duplicates. And if you are wanting to update a record as a result of receiving a web form, you need to use either manual, but more preferably an automated approach to check that the first thing that you get through, it then goes off and updates the master record, wherever that may be, somewhere else.
100%.
So just treat it all as like a big in tray, and then work out how to deal with each one as it comes in.
Yeah, it is much better, in my opinion, it is much better as a way of gathering information rather than updating. So you can use it to like, hey, update your contact details. Is this still, you can do that, but it's going to require you to create a new item and then check and replace or whatever. And there are better ways that we'll talk about in a second of doing that sort of thing. But where this comes into its own are things like the use case I gave you where, I've got an event I'm running and I'm trying to gather, information from someone about their next of kin and their dietary. Those are perfect because what you're really doing is you're using the pre-filled bits to identify the parts you need to identify, like this, it's this person for this event on this date, etc. And you're pre-filling that bit so that they can't touch it. And you're gathering new information you've never had. That's where this use case fucking flies, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, as I said, remember, it's a catching tool. It's not an updating tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a last one I'm going to touch on, although I think this will deserve its own. I'm going to do its own. I may get Andrew and maybe you on a group one to talk about it, because I want to dive in more into the capabilities of a PWA external link, because I'm not going to dive too much into it on this episode because it's a long fucking narrative that we could draw out for a while. But the last kind of internal to Podio one, in my opinion, is an external link. And this is the one that bridges the gap between using just Podio tools and kind of externalizing them and using some of the other tools we're about to talk about. And an external link is something that you can create in GlobiFlow in Citrix PWA. And essentially it creates a unique link that can be clicked on, And you can actually make the page it goes to do almost anything. So you can display data, you can display tables, you can get referenced items from all over your Podio, create tables and buttons and links to new web forms. You can create it as a holding page or a sort of a splash page, which then links to a bunch of things. It can be amazingly powerful, but it also is slow.
Very.
So the warning is, it's great to use in some circumstances, but if you push it too far, and we've pushed it too far, if they're on like a 3G, 4G connection, it is not a sensible option. Would you agree?
Completely. And in its most pure form, when you say in PWA, I want to create a new external link for this app, for this item, the first brick that it automatically puts in on the flow is a web page brick. And what some people don't realize is that, as you've just then said, whilst it puts it in at the top and then you can put more things underneath, you can also change that order and put in your get referenced. You can build tables, you can build variables, you can do whatever the hell you like, and then show the web form. Sorry, not the web form, the web page. But that's the problem, is that whilst anything that you've put above the web page is going on, the web page is not loading. So the person at the other end is waiting for a process. So all they're seeing is a blank white page waiting for the web page bit to be triggered and come in. And so it should be used carefully and infrequently would be my steer.
I've had great success in using this in where we've maybe sent an email. And in that email, we've got an action button.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to confirm that you love cheese? Yes, or, and the action button is yes. And when let's give a real example, a property management example where the lease is up for renewal and we're going to send them a 90-day notice that it's up for renewal. Is it your intention to stay another year? Yep. And click here to tell us you want to stay another year. Click here to tell us you don't. And when they click here to say they want to stay another year, we're using a Podio, Citrix PWA external link, which then we know who clicked it, what they're clicking, so we can do lots of actions. But we can also take them to a page which shows them a branded page, which shows them maybe, great, you want to stay another year, to review your blah, 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 click here, to review your this, click there. And we're giving them some information there. So we're getting an action from the click and doing something, but we're also then showing them something that is branded. That's, to me, one of the simplest use cases where this flies.
It does, with one caveat,
please,
which is you need to be careful, because some email clients automatically scan and ping and check links that are inside them. And so we've seen use cases where, for example, someone said, you send out a link going, click here if you want to stay a year. And for argument's sake, all of the Gmail addresses instantly responded saying that they wanted to stay another year. And you're like, looks like Google automatically checks each link.
We've never had that.
So yeah, I can't remember which email provider it was, but we've certainly seen that, and it's been...
That would be irritating. Yeah, we've never had that, but that is, I think it's a good example of where external links can really help you, where you've got something, you've got an action you want them to take. That can also be, by the way, embedded on a web page. If you don't want to, there's lots of ways of doing it. You've got an action you want them to take, something to click, and it's going to show them a bit of information, maybe some links to new things, and those are going to be dynamically generated each time based on the context of which bit of Podio you're linking to. That is a great use case, but it can be super fucking slow. So you have to be very careful in how you build. We've built really complex ones that we've had to walk away from eventually because the load times were like, nah, we got to find a better way of doing this.
Sure. Another kind of variation, I suppose, of the external link is kind of related, is that PWA can create a CMS, so content management system function, And that's where you can say that you want PWA to create either a single item or a table or a click-through table, i.e. where you click through to the detail of that table from an app or an item in an app. And again, it's pretty basic. It's quite good. It's an easy way to get information out. You can use it in conjunction with external links as well. So you can say, you know, here's all your stuff and click on here to go and do something about each one. But to be some of the kind of cautions about it is that the CMS is technically, I think, been in beta for about 10 years. And that the refresh time is something like every 15 minutes. And so it can lead to confusing results when, especially, you've got automations that are running on something that someone's done, but then they look back at the CMS version and it's all cached. It's still showing what was true 1 minute ago or 14 minutes ago, let alone what's true right now. So tread slightly carefully on that.
Yeah, my honest opinion is if you're going to if the CMS functionality isn't that useful, I think if you're going to really want to show that, you're going to have to do it with your own custom web application. If you really want to show, if you really want to play in that end, which takes us to the next kind of the final level of this. Just, you know, today's podcast is really a broad overview of the ways, the pitfalls, etc., that you can do it. We'll dive probably into each of these in more, and particularly I will in the masterclass as well. But the third category is really this, you know, where you are taking Podio data and externalizing it using some sort of third-party system. You know, whether that is third-party system that you build or third-party system that you're using via some other bit of software. So let's start with, you know, you identified it as sort of skins and middleware. And I would say skins, middleware, and custom builds would be the three. So from a skins point of view, we've got things like Proc.fu, and then low code, no code systems like bubble.io. Let's start with Proc.fu. What are your thoughts on Proc.fu? Is this, you know?
I think Prop.fu is brilliant. So Prop.fu have an option in their plan called mini apps, and the idea and the basic premise of a mini app is is exactly the kind of use case that we're talking about here, which is Podio is overwhelming. What you really want to do is just show 3 fields, not 100, and, you know, don't have to navigate through a load of workspaces and a load of apps to get what you want. You want to turn it into a mini website. That's basically what you're saying, like a nice little mini website that you can brand however you want, structure however you want. So that's the kind of gap that mini apps have gone into. They're insanely customizable. You can build incredible processes both on their front end and also as a result in your back end in your Podio platform. The biggest advantage that I think that Prop.fu Mini Apps has over everything else now really is that it was built for Podio first. So it was built by Andreas, who originally. Sorry again.
And the price.
And the price. I'll come to that price. Don't you worry. But yeah, it was built by Andreas, who originally built Globiflow, which is now Podio Workflow Automation. And it's you will struggle to find something that is Podio centric, Podio targeted, Podio compatible, out of the box for the price that you get, which is starting off as free and then going up to a dizzying $9 when you start paying for it. And then, you know, of course, the more you use it,
till you get the mini apps bit.
Is it 25? Yeah. Sorry.
$25. $25
a
a month to be able to do mini apps is just insane. A good use case that we've done a ton of mini apps over the years. We did a ton when we had Game Changers going, and I'm sure that Andrew and his team are doing a ton still. And I'll tell you one really like simple example. A timesheet. So we used to have companies that had external field teams, like I've said before, and those guys don't want to fuck around with Podio. They don't want to fuck around with Podio. And so we simply had a timesheet app. We built a mini app on top of it where we could give them the link. They could simply select themselves as an employee. You could make it more complex and make them log in and do all that shit. We didn't need to. We just were like, here's a link, guys. Save it on your phone every day. They click that little icon on their phone. It pops up. They select their name. They click and they say, I'm starting. And then they click and say, I'm stopping. And it was a mini app, and it was super simple as an externalizing, as someone who wasn't in Podio could just be bam, bam, bam. But internally, we got exactly what we needed. We got, here's the employee's start time, here's the employee's end time, and we could use the genius of Podio to work out all the billables and the employables and all the rest of it. But for the user, no Podio, no nonsense, no Podio app on their phone trying to navigate it. Just a very simple form they could fill in.
And all completely customizable, right? And all branded however you wanted. Completely
branded to them, customizable. For most of them, what we did eventually was actually give them a kind of login. They could you can set different ways of logging into a mini app. We gave them a username and a password. They logged in and they could see all their timesheets for the whole year. They could review them, click on them, see the information, update them, etc. Update them if we let them or not. And all of that driven in a kind of more web-based environment they were familiar with.
And that gets over that initial learning curve,
Podio
doesn't it?
curve.
Like you don't need to put them through the Podio journey. You don't need to explain what this is. Everyone knows how to use a website. So this basically turns your Podio data into a website. And one critical thing that it also allows you to do, again, as a differentiator between say, opening the Podio app on your phone and entering a timesheet via a Podio native process, is that if you are a member of a workspace in Podio, you can see all the apps, all the data, all the submissions in the timesheet app, all of that stuff, not just yours. You can kind of make it get that way, but at any point you can say, now just show me everything. Whereas with Prop3 mini apps, if you set it up in the way that you want to, and if this is your use case, then you can just say, I only want to see today's records for me, go.
Yeah. I actually want to broaden this right now because I don't want this podcast could go on for 4 hours, and I don't want it to. So I'm going to say this is going to be cheap and nasty, just like me. And if we think about externalizing Podio data, I view it as there's the Ford Focus, there's the Jeep Wrangler, and then there's the Ferrari. I don't know, whatever. Okay. There's basically the cheap to the expensive, right? The cheap is going to be Prop3 mini apps. Is going to be kind of Prop3 mini app type where Prop3 is very affordable. It's very easy to create. Your cheap is it's not as customizable. It's not to get it working really fast with lots of large data. You're going to have to do some sort of SQL sync in there to make sure that happens. That the sort of cheap and I don't want to say cheap and nasty, but the cheap and quick and wonderful is the mini apps. At the super expensive Ferrari fucking McLaren F1 side, you've got build your own web application where you are literally taking Podio data, building some sort of SQL sync so that data flows back and forth. And then you are building an environment in a web, in a web application where you are, and that is your Rolls Royce type, where you want someone to log into hub.mydomain.com and they see a beautiful web application with all their orders and their customer information and they can update it. And we've built lots of those, but they take more time and are a lot more expensive. But of course, they give a much better user kind of interface, a brand experience. And in the middle is sort of your bubble.io, where I think actually bubble.io is the least of those, because Prop3 is brilliant and cost effective. The other one is amazing and expensive. And Bubble is kind of the worst of all worlds in some ways. And I don't mean that as disrespectful as it sounds, because it's good, but you're not getting the flexibility of building your own shit. It's a lot slower and it's going to take you a lot of time.
And you need to work out how to make it link to your Podio data, because it's not built for Podio. It's not built for Podio. It can talk to Podio, but you need to make it do it. Whereas, say, Prop3 is built to talk to Podio. Your custom Ferrari isn't, but the person putting it together would be doing
Yeah.
the Podio integration for you.
And I think if you're going to really think about use cases where, say, you've got customers and you want them to log in and see information in their orders or their projects and be able to give you updates and all that, but you don't want them in Podio, you've really got those two pillars. It's either a ProcFu mini app or a custom web application, in my opinion, are really the ways you want to look. One is going to cost you a lot less, but be less functional and slightly less, design wise, you're going to have slight restrictions and all that, but it's going to be quicker and cheaper. And one is going to be where you really care about a brand experience, et cetera. And you're expecting to spend $15,000 to $20,000 to build a web portal. To me, those are the only two that matter, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I want Bubble.io and those like it to be more Podio leaning than they are, but they're not. So, the strength that things like Bubble might have is that they are more suited also, say, to dovetail straight into the Google API and chuck maps all over the place, or integrate to a payment gateway, or because again, what Bubble does is it's saying we are going to be your own low code, no code app builder service. You just link it to what you want, and then you can drag and drop this stuff around. As I said, though, but Podio isn't out the box, so it can't do that for Podio. It doesn't do that.
Yeah, and I gotta say, we did a project a couple years ago. The project that we did a couple years ago, using Bubble.io, and it may have improved a lot, but it wasn't very. The problem is, and particularly if you're so used to using Podio. If you're really used to building in Podio, you're used to being able to do almost anything with Citrix PWA. Like Citrix PWA spoils us because you can do almost anything. Add in ProcFu and fucking you can do anything, and do it quickly. And the problem is when that sets your expectations that everywhere out there workflow automation can be done that quickly and that brilliantly. And Bubble simply wasn't there. Maybe it is now, but it just wasn't there. And so we ended up with, we ended up like feeling like we were walking through treacle, like molasses when you were trying to do this. So really, I think, your best options are ProcFu. I think ProcFu mini apps, if I was going to say to anyone who wanted to get started on externalizing Podio data, right now, procfu.com, fucking buy an account and read up on mini apps, because I don't build in Podio anymore, and I haven't built in Podio really for 3 years. I can still put together a mini app in 20 minutes, which does what I need it to do. It's not going to have lots of bells and whistles, but it's got the Podio do-it-yourself feel, but your results can be really quite nice.
Yeah, agreed. And again, though, it is like all these things, all the stuff we're talking about, the more you delve into it, the more you unpick it, the more you pull at stuff, you'll find more and more and more options, more and more possibilities. But equally then, the more complicated you're making it. So it's more likely that you're going to need to learn some coding elements as well in order to get the absolute most out of it. But you're right that it's in various places, it's kind of just drop ship, press this button. And I think Andreas has released the ProcFu Ninja that can build a mini app for you in like 30 seconds when you say I want to apps together.
Comparatively, if we're talking about, you've got a Podio consultancy, you build Podio for people all the time. You guys, I'm sure you can build, the time it takes to build a Podio mini app, even one that's relatively complex compared to the time it takes to build a web application from scratch. Yeah. Even if you're using a Symfony or one of these kind of coding structures, even if you're using that, the time, in 8 to 10 hours of work, you can get an enormous amount done, versus 8 to 10 hours in a web application is like, well, okay, we've gotten started.
Scratching the surface, yeah.
Right. And so really, that's why I'm saying I don't mean it to be disrespectful when I say a Ford versus a Ferrari, because actually, all I'm talking about is, it's not about Ford versus Ferrari so much as it's, one, there are restrictions, but the cost and speed are a massive advantage. The other, cost and speed go massively down, but the results are up unbelievable. So where's your sweet spot? Do you need to spend $35,000 building a web application, a complex web application that is all singing, all dancing, and is exactly branded and blah, 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 blah? Well, probably not. If, in which case, $5,000 will get you a tremendous amount at a mini app stage.
Yeah. And you could view it that, a mini app is a great proof of concept. You can get there on and iterate quickly. You can get it to test out your processes and how it's going to work in the back end. And if you really decide that you want more power, more grunt, more speed, more whatever is missing, then you could take that mock-up, for want of a better way of putting it, and give that to a developer saying, make that, but do it over here. Absolutely.
All right. Well, listen, I think that's a pretty good overview of the ways. I would sum this up by saying, if you want to simply show people a bit of data, an external link, or there are ways of doing that are pretty easy. I would say only bring people into Podio if you're going to seriously bring them into Podio. If you're not going to seriously bring them into Podio, investigate one of these other systems, other ways of doing it. And if you're going to really try and externalize a lot of data, the best option is a mini app or a web portal. The mini app being much quicker and much cheaper with some more restrictions. The web portal being all singing, all dancing, and budget is your only limit. Right?
Spot on.
So, start to think about I would say start to think about, what does it mean to me to externalize Podio data? Who do I want to see it? What do I want them to see? How do I want them to interact with it? And if you answer those questions, it'll lead you to the way. And if you've got any questions, just drop Pete a line. I'm going to drop his contact information into the podcast information. Drop Pete a line, or head over to wearegamechangers.com. You can fill in a Podio, a partner request. I've got a whole group of partners, in which Pete is one of them, where I can match you up. But Pete has a huge amount of knowledge in this. His contact details will be in the podcast information. So please do drop him a line.
Thank you very much.
All right, Pete, I got to go. My daughter has a recital and I am not going to miss it.
That's the correct decision.
Yeah. And I'm also heading off to Italy tomorrow. So
hard life for some of us, eh?
Yeah, I'm going on holiday. So this will come out in a couple weeks.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jordan. Been great to talk.
All right, Pete. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you guys for listening. Please remember to like, share, click things that you're supposed to click, and make sure that you spread the gospel of Podio via the Supercharged podcast.
You've been listening to another awesome episode of Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to be notified of new podcast episodes, Podio masterclasses, and in-depth Podio extension reviews. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a review on your podcast player to help support the show.